The night came down
Are
over
you
the
mine
plains the
tonight,
way a blanket
Cyrus?
is pulled tight, slow, and certain, dimming the last red edge of the sun until the land held its breath. Coyotes called from far off, their voices thin and lonely, and the fire at the center of the camp cracked low, as if it too was trying not to be heard. It was the kind of night that remembered things, the kind that carried old promises and older regrets in the wind. When she spoke his name, softly but without fear, Cyrus felt that the world had narrowed to the space between them. He had ridden hard all day, dust still clinging to his boots and the hem of his coat. His horse grazed nearby, head low, trusting the darkness. Cyrus stood with his hands hanging at his sides, broad shoulders tense, eyes fixed on the fire as though answers might rise from the coals. He had grown up on this land, learned its moods the way a child learns a mother's face. He knew when the river would flood, when the grass would burn, when the elders would sit in silence because words would do more harm than good. Still, the question she asked him did not belong to the land or the past. It belonged to now. "Are you mine tonight, Cyrus, or just a fleeting desire you will regret later?" Her voice did not tremble. That was what struck him first. She stood across the firelight, the glow catching in her dark hair, warming her skin, making her eyes shine with something deeper than want. There was pride there, and patience, and a warning. She was not asking for a promise made lightly. She was asking for truth, and truth had always been the hardest thing for him to give. Cyrus had been raised between two worlds. The old ways shaped his bones, his breath, the way he greeted the morning. The new ways pressed in from every side, fences cutting the land into pieces, laws written by men who had never listened to the earth. He had learned to survive by keeping parts of himself hidden. Tonight those hidden parts stirred, restless and aching. They had known each other since childhood, running barefoot through summer grass, laughing as they stole apples from a trader's wagon, sitting quiet beside the river when words felt too small. As they grew older, the space between them changed. It filled with looks held too long, with silences heavy as stone. The elders noticed, the women whispered. Cyrus pretended not to hear any of it, because hearing would mean choosing, and choosing meant risking loss. She was no stranger to risk. Her life had taught her that. She carried herself with the calm strength of someone who knew who she was and where she came from. Tradition lived in her hands, in the careful way she moved, in the songs she sang under her breath when she thought no one was listening. Yet there was a hunger in her too, not just for love, but for being seen fully, without fear or excuses. The fire popped, sending a small spray of sparks into the night. Cyrus finally looked at her, really looked, and felt the weight of everything he had not said settle on his chest. He wanted to reach across the flames, to close the distance, to let the world narrow again until only her breath and his heartbeat mattered. But the land had taught him patience, and pain had taught him caution. "This is not a simple night," he said at last, his voice low, rough from dust and doubt. "Nothing between us ever has been?" She nodded once, as if she had expected that answer. "I did not ask for simple," she replied. "I asked for honest." The word cut deeper than any blade. Honest, it meant admitting that he had thought of her on long rides, that her absence had felt heavier than any saddle. It meant admitting fear, the kind that comes when love asks you to stand still instead of running. Around them the camp slept. Somewhere an elder turned in his blankets. Somewhere else a child dreamed of the future without knowing how hard it would be. Old American nights like this had seen countless choices made and unmade. Cowboys and warriors, settlers and families, all standing at the edge of something they could not yet name. Cyrus felt that history pressing close, reminding him that every choice leaves a mark. He thought of the stories his grandfather used to tell, stories of love tested by time, by loss, by the pull of duty. Those stories never ended cleanly. They ended with lessons, with scars, with memories passed down like heirlooms. Cyrus wondered what kind of story he was living in now, and whether it would be told with pride or with regret. She stepped closer to the fire, the light drawing lines of gold along her cheekbones. "Tonight does not ask for forever," she said, softer now. "It asks for truth. If you walk away, I will still stand. But do not take from me what you cannot carry." Her words held the strength of the plains themselves. Cyrus swallowed, his throat tight. He knew what it meant to take without giving, to leave someone carrying the weight alone. He had seen it done too many times by men who confused desire with courage. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of sage and smoke. Cyrus closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the land, to the blood in his ears. He felt pulled between the man he had been taught to be and the man he might become if he chose differently tonight. Love, he knew, was not just a feeling. It was a responsibility, a promise made not only to another, but to oneself. When he opened his eyes again, she was still watching him, waiting without pleading. That, more than anything, unsettled him. She did not need him to choose her to be whole. She wanted him to choose her because he was ready to stand beside her, not in front or behind. Cyrus took a step forward, then stopped. The fire crackled between them, a line of light and shadow. He could cross it, he could turn away. Either path would change them. Somewhere in the darkness, a drum sounded faintly, maybe from another camp, maybe only in his memory. It beat slow and steady, like a heart reminding him that time does not wait for hesitation forever. He drew a breath, tasting smoke and night, and felt the weight of her question settle into his bones. The answer rose in him, heavy and uncertain, shaped by love, fear, and the long history of a people who had survived by choosing carefully. Before he could speak, the wind surged, bending the flames low and scattering sparks into the dark. The moment stretched, fragile and sharp, balanced on the edge of words not yet spoken. And in that pause, with the night listening and the land holding its breath, Cyrus stood between regret and belonging, knowing that whatever he said next would follow him long after this fire burned to ash. Cyrus shifted his weight, boots pressing into the soft earth, and for the first time noticed how quiet the night had become. The usual chorus of crickets and distant calls of owls seemed to hold their breath along with him. He could feel the tension in the air, a living thing twisting around the firelight, heavy with unspoken words. He wanted to look away, to find some distraction in the trees or the horse grazing nearby, but her eyes held him like a tether, drawing him back to the question he was still not ready to answer. He remembered the first time he had seen her, years ago, when the plains were still wide and the sky endless above him. She had been smaller then, fierce in the way children can be, eyes sharp and daring. She had challenged him to a race to the river, and though he had been faster, she had crossed the finish line first, not because she had won, but because she had refused to lose her own pride. From that day forward, a quiet rivalry had grown between them, a thread woven with teasing, stolen glances, and laughter that echoed long after the sun dipped below the horizon. But that childhood closeness had grown complicated over the years. Both had learned the weight of responsibilities. She had become a keeper of traditions, tending to her family and the elders, learning the ways of the land and the stories that shaped it. Cyrus had learned to navigate the boundaries of a world that demanded strength and caution, where trust was earned slowly and betrayal was punished by silence or worse. Their paths had always crossed at the edges, near the firelight, along the river, or beneath the wide sky, and every meeting carried the electric pull of something neither of them could name aloud. Now, standing across from her, he felt the past and present entwined in a way that made his chest tight. There was a history here, yes, but also a question of what might come. He knew the elders would disapprove if he let desire rule without thought. Yet he also knew that some choices demanded courage above all else, and that letting the moment slip could mean a lifetime of wondering what might have been. She shifted slightly, her hand brushing against a pouch at her side, a gesture so small and subtle that it might have gone unnoticed, yet Cyrus noticed. That pouch carried herbs, stories, memories, tokens of protection and healing. It was part of who she was, careful, prepared, grounded in the wisdom passed down from those who had walked the plains long before them. Her eyes, dark and unwavering, held questions that seemed older than either of them, as though she carried the weight of generations in her gaze. Cyrus swallowed. He wanted to speak, to break the tension, but words felt too fragile. Instead, he allowed his mind to drift, thinking back to the first winter they had spent alone in the camp with the river frozen at the edge of the trees. They had huddled together for warmth, wrapped in blankets their families had woven. There had been laughter then, yes, but also a quiet understanding. Survival required patience, trust, and strength. It was a lesson he had carried with him ever since. The wind rose again, whispering through the grass and bending the fire low. Shadows danced across her face, and for a moment he thought he saw something more than hope or desire there, something that frightened him, something raw and unguarded. He had been careful all his life, cautious in matters of the heart, but this night demanded reckoning. It demanded that he confront the fear he had long buried beneath work, duty, and the endless horizon of the plains. He thought of the stories his mother had told him, of spirits that walked the night and tested those who dared to follow their hearts. Love, she had said, was a spirit that would not be tamed, that could guide or destroy depending on the strength of the one who carried it. Cyrus had never believed entirely, but tonight, in the quiet, with her standing there, he felt the truth of it pressing against his ribs. She shifted again, closer to the fire, letting the warmth lick at her skin, illuminating her features in soft, golden light. "You cannot hide behind the land forever, Cyrus," she said softly. "It knows, even when we do not. It will remind us of the choices we refuse to make." Her words hit him with the weight of inevitability. The land did know. Every ridge, every river bend, every whisper of the wind carried memory and warning. It had seen lovers torn apart, families broken, and men who thought themselves clever enough to outwit its lessons. It had also seen those who dared to follow their hearts, who risked everything for love, and somehow found a way to survive. Cyrus took another step closer, though the distance remained, heavy with history and hesitation. "I have always tried to do right," he said, voice low. "Right for my family, for the elders, for the land, for myself, but sometimes right does not mean what we think it does." She tilted her head slightly, the firelight catching the curve of her jaw. "Sometimes right is just having the courage to be honest," she said. Her gaze did not waver. "Even when it hurts, even when it is risky, even when it could change everything." He felt the truth of her words pierce him. Every choice he had made, every path he had followed, had been influenced by fear, caution, by the weight of what others expected. But this tonight was different. Tonight demanded that he choose for himself, for both of them, not for anyone else. Yet the question lingered, more dangerous than any storm he had ridden through. Could he risk the heart he had kept guarded for so long? Could he face the possibility of regret? The fire crackled and flared, throwing long shadows across the ground. Somewhere, a branch snapped under the weight of an animal moving unseen, a reminder that the world outside their little circle was alive, waiting, watching. Cyrus felt the pulse of the plains underfoot, the deep, slow rhythm of life that had persisted long before either of them was born. It reminded him that every choice left a mark, and that some decisions could not be undone. Her hand moved again, brushing against the pouch, this time almost absent-mindedly. It was a gesture of preparation, of protection, of knowing. She was strong, grounded, and yet she had opened herself to him with a single question, one that carried more weight than any spoken vow. "Are you mine tonight, Cyrus, or just a fleeting desire you will regret later?" The words hung between them, heavy as the night itself. Cyrus wanted to answer, to reach across the fire, to close the distance that history, fear, and unspoken truths had built. But he knew that the answer could not be rushed. It could not be forced. He had to choose carefully or risk losing not just the night, but the chance for anything beyond it. A hush settled over the camp. The fire's glow softened, the wind stilled, and even the distant river seemed to pause in its flow, as if the world itself was holding its breath for his decision. He felt the weight of her gaze, steady and unwavering, carrying expectation, patience, and quiet challenge. He thought of the long ride that had brought him here, the dust and sweat and sunburn, the miles of solitude. Every moment had led to this single point where history and desire collided. He felt the pull of everything he had hidden, everything he had denied, and realized that no lesson, no tradition, no caution could shield him from what was happening now. Yet he could not speak, not yet. The fire crackled once, then settled into silence. The wind rose again, tugging at their hair and clothes, carrying with it the scent of sage and earth, of rain yet to come. The night stretched endlessly, full of possibility and danger, the kind that had shaped the lives of every generation before them. Cyrus felt the tension deepen, not only between himself and her but within himself. The question, the unspoken truths, the pull of the land, the weight of history, they all pressed against him, demanding reckoning. He wanted to step forward to embrace what they both seemed to desire, yet caution anchored him. Love, he had learned, was never simple, and the plains had taught him that some nights test the heart more than the body. She stepped closer, her movement deliberate, measured, full of intent. "You do not have to speak yet," she said, voice soft but certain. "I am here. That is enough for now. But you must feel it. You must decide what you carry with you, Cyrus. Not tomorrow. Not next week, tonight." Her words lingered, vibrating in the still air, and he realized that nothing would ever be the same. Every step he took from here would be weighed against this moment, this question, this fire-lit truth. The night was theirs, yet it belonged to no one. It demanded courage, honesty, and the willingness to face what might come. Cyrus took a slow breath, tasting the smoke and earth, feeling the pull of the land beneath his feet. He wanted to answer. He wanted to cross the fire and close the space that had grown between them. But he also knew that some answers could not be given lightly and that every choice carried risk. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the echo of her question, and somewhere in the darkness, the distant howl of a coyote reminded him that life, like the plains, waits for no hesitation. Cyrus stood there, heart pounding, caught between desire and caution, between history and the unknown. As the night stretched on around them, full of shadows and promise, danger and longing, waiting for a decision that would change everything. And in the quiet that followed, with the fire flickering low and the stars wide and indifferent above, neither of them spoke, knowing that the night had not yet yielded its answer. The moment hung suspended, fragile and sharp, as though the world itself was waiting to see which path he would take. Cyrus shifted again, restless, aware that every passing moment deepened the tension between them. The night seemed endless, stretching across the plains like a ribbon of shadow and quiet firelight. Around them the camp slept, but he could feel the pulse of the land, steady and insistent, reminding him that the world did not pause for hesitation. Every story, every decision, every whispered promise had been shaped here, beneath the same stars, by the same wind that now tugged at his coat and her hair. He remembered the warning his father had given him long ago, in a voice low and grave. "The heart is a fire, son. Treat it like the plains. Too much and it burns you. Too little and it dies." Those words had guided him through storms, through long rides across sun-baked lands, through arguments and loss. And now, standing here, he realized they applied to this moment, this choice, this fragile connection that could either ignite or vanish like smoke on the wind. She watched him quietly, her expression unreadable in the dim firelight. Cyrus could see the subtle tension in her stance, the way she shifted weight from one foot to another, hands brushing lightly over the pouch she carried. That pouch, always there, a symbol of her careful preparation, was now a symbol of what she might carry away if he failed to meet her honesty with his own. The air between them was heavy with expectation, history, and desire, and every heartbeat seemed magnified in the hush of the night. There was more at stake than just themselves. The elders of her people had eyes everywhere, and whispers traveled faster than the river in spring flood. A choice made in haste, in passion, could ripple outward, affecting alliances, traditions, and family ties. Cyrus knew that. He had seen what happens when hearts are ignored or misread, families fractured, friendships lost, and lives weighed down by silence. The burden was heavier than desire, heavier than longing, yet he also saw the stubborn pride in her eyes, a fire that refused to be dimmed by history, by caution, by expectation. She was not just asking for him tonight. She was daring him to face the truth of who they were, of what they wanted, of what they might risk. And he, raised on the lessons of patience and survival, found himself caught in a new kind of trap, the one built not by land or law, but by the pull of two hearts refusing to yield. Cyrus's thoughts drifted to the subplots that had silently shaped their lives. Her younger brother had recently returned from a distant settlement, bringing stories of newcomers encroaching on their lands. He had seen distrust growing among the elders, a wariness of strangers, and a tightening of traditions meant to protect the people from outside influence. Cyrus knew that any sign of weakness, any misstep between him and her, could be misinterpreted, sparking suspicion or resentment. Love, in this context, was more than private, it was political, it was strategic, it carried consequences far beyond the two of them. She, too, carried her own conflicts. The weight of responsibility, of keeping traditions alive, rested on her shoulders. Every choice she made was observed, evaluated, and sometimes judged. She had learned to measure desire against duty, and to speak when necessary but remain silent when discretion mattered. And yet, here she stood, asking a question that refused to be measured, a question that demanded clarity, honesty, and courage. It was a bold act, one that could have consequences she might not yet fully see. The fire flickered again, shadows dancing across the ground, and Cyrus felt the pull of his past mistakes, the mistakes of men who had let fear dictate their actions. He thought of friends lost, of promises broken, of love abandoned too soon. Each memory weighed on him, reminding him that hesitation could be its own kind of betrayal. Yet fear, as always, whispered in the quiet of his mind, urging caution, urging retreat. She took a small step forward, bridging the gap without breaking the fragile line of space between them. "Cyrus," she said softly, "I am not asking for more than you can give, but I need to know that what you feel is real, not just for tonight, but for whatever comes after." Her voice was steady, carrying the authority of someone who had lived long enough to understand that words without truth are hollow. He swallowed, tasting the smoke and night air, the weight of her gaze pressing against him. He wanted to respond, to confess, to reach across the fire and let the moment carry them beyond doubt. But the questions lingered: how much of this was desire and how much was obligation? How could he honor both the history of the land and the intensity of what they shared? The conflict between duty and longing gnawed at him, a quiet storm threatening to spill over. Meanwhile, the camp remained silent, but life continued just beyond their small circle of light. The horse shifted in its sleep, leaves rustled faintly in the breeze, and somewhere a coyote's cry pierced the night. The world outside their moment was alive, persistent, and indifferent, a reminder that whatever choice he made would have to contend, not just with emotion but with reality. Cyrus thought of the elders, of the stories woven into every corner of the land. There were tales of love tested by hardship, by loss, by the encroachment of settlers and traders. Each story carried lessons he had absorbed over years of listening, of watching, of surviving. He knew that love was not just an act of the heart, it was an act of courage, an act of defiance, an act of truth. Yet courage demanded clarity, and clarity demanded reckoning with fears he had long ignored. She noticed his hesitation and did not scold, did not demand. She simply waited, letting the silence stretch, letting the tension deepen. She had learned that patience often speaks louder than words, and that the night can hold secrets that daylight cannot reveal. Her own heart was no less conflicted than his, but she had resolved, in her way, to meet the moment with honesty. Cyrus's gaze drifted to the horizon, to the vast sweep of plains and sky that had shaped his life. The land seemed endless, but within it were invisible boundaries, the kind drawn by memory, tradition, and consequence. Every choice he made tonight would be framed by those boundaries, and he felt the weight pressing on him more heavily than the pack on his back or the saddle beneath him. He realized that desire alone would not be enough. It had to be tempered by understanding, by patience, by respect for the forces that shaped both their lives. She stepped again, just close enough that the firelight caught the edges of her silhouette, but far enough that the space remained electric and charged. "We cannot ignore what we feel," she said softly, "nor can we ignore the world we live in. Both matter, both are real, both demand reckoning." Her words pierced him, a reminder that the conflict was larger than either of them alone. Their connection, their desire, existed within a framework of history, of family, of survival. Ignoring it would be easier, but easier was never the path he wanted, and yet the path of honesty was fraught with risk. Every step forward could bring reward, or it could bring loss. The tension between those possibilities made his chest tight and his hands restless. Cyrus's mind flicked to the subplots swirling around them. The younger brother, the outsiders encroaching on the land, the elders' expectations, all these threads intersected with their own story, complicating it in ways neither could fully control. Every choice he made tonight would ripple outward, carrying consequences far beyond the firelight. The weight of those possibilities pressed on him, yet he could not step back, not entirely. The pull of truth, of desire, of connection was too strong, demanding action even as it demanded caution. The wind rose again, tugging at their clothes and hair, carrying with it the scent of the river, and the sage burned in small fires at other camps. The night seemed to pulse with life, alive with memory, warning, and possibility. Cyrus realized that the conflict was not just between them, it was within them, is shaped by fear, longing, history, and responsibility. To choose blindly could mean regret. To hesitate could mean loss. She watched him, steady and unflinching, waiting for a decision he could not yet make. Her presence was a challenge and a comfort, a reminder that some truths cannot be avoided. She carried her own history, her own fears, her own courage, and she had chosen in this moment to meet him here without retreat. That alone was a risk, a declaration, a spark that might ignite or vanish with the wind. Cyrus felt the weight of everything pressing on him, the past, the land, the elders, the unknown future. Desire, duty, fear, and hope intertwined in a knot he could not untangle with words alone. The firelight flickered, shadows leapt across the ground, and the wind whispered through the grass, carrying all the questions and none of the answers. He realized that the night would not release them from suspense, that the tension would stretch on, pulling at their hearts, testing their patience, demanding reckoning. And so they stood, two figures caught in the firelight, the land around them vast and indifferent, their hearts tied to a question neither could fully answer. The conflict was alive, twisting and turning, deeper than desire, wider than tradition, more dangerous than silence. The night held them suspended, waiting, watching, knowing that the resolution would come only when courage met truth and that the consequences, whatever they might be, would echo far beyond the firelight. The stars blinked coldly above, distant witnesses to a tension that neither could yet release. The coyote cried again, distant but insistent, a reminder that the world moves forward even when hearts hesitate. Cyrus took a breath, feeling the weight of history, responsibility, and longing pressing against him. The night waited, she waited. The plains themselves seemed to hold their breath. And in that moment the conflict stretched wider, deeper, unresolved, carrying them both forward into the unknown, into the long, fragile night that had yet to reveal its secrets. Cyrus's boots pressed into the earth again, restless, as though the ground itself demanded movement to match the storm inside him. The night had grown colder, the fire low and golden, shadows curling along the edges of the camp like fingers reaching for secrets. He could feel every heartbeat echoing in his chest, louder than the soft rustle of leaves or the distant river's flow. She stood there, steady and unwavering, and yet the tension between them had grown taut, stretching invisible threads across the firelight, threads that could snap with a single word, a single gesture, a single choice. The air smelled of sage and smoke, of damp earth, of the river winding somewhere beyond the trees. Cyrus could almost hear it speaking in its own language, murmuring of paths taken and paths denied, of promises kept and broken. He had ridden these plains for years, familiar with every rise and hollow, every whisper of wind, yet tonight nothing was familiar. Everything was charged with anticipation. The world seemed to lean closer, curious and waiting. Her eyes met his again, calm but daring. "Cyrus," she said, the name a soft drumbeat against the silence, "you cannot hide from this. From me, from what we both feel, the land knows it. The night knows it. You know it?" He swallowed, fighting the tightness in his throat. Every instinct he had taught himself over the years, the lessons of patience, survival, restraint clashed violently with the pull of desire, of longing, of connection that had grown between them for so long. To act, to speak, to cross the line was to risk everything, the judgment of elders, the expectations of families, the fragile balance of history. To hesitate was also dangerous, a slow erosion of courage that could leave him haunted by regret. Cyrus's mind flicked back to her brother, recently returned from a distant settlement with stories of outsiders creeping into the lands. Their presence was a silent threat, a reminder that the world beyond the firelight could intrude at any moment, bringing danger, misunderstanding, or conflict. Every choice he made tonight could ripple outward, affecting not just them, but the wider circle of people whose lives were intertwined with their own. He had learned long ago that desire alone could never be enough. Yet here she stood, closer now, the firelight drawing the lines of her face sharp and soft at once, revealing strength and vulnerability in equal measure. Cyrus could see the determination in her posture, the careful balance she maintained between caution and courage. She had learned the language of restraint, of history, of survival, yet she was risking it all with a single question, a single invitation for truth. The wind shifted again, rustling through the grass and carrying a faint chill that ran across Cyrus's neck. He realized that the night itself was conspiring, heightening every sensation, sharpening every thought, making the stakes higher than they had ever been. He felt the pull of the past, the weight of memory, and the urgency of the present converging into a single, intense point. He thought of the stories his grandfather had told him, of warriors and lovers, of choices made at the edge of firelight, choices that shaped lives and legacies. Those stories had always ended with lessons learned, sometimes hard, sometimes bitter, sometimes triumphant. Tonight he felt like one of those stories, caught in the wind, suspended between courage and fear. She took another step closer, her movement deliberate, careful, measured. The firelight flickered across her hair, making it shimmer like dark water, and Cyrus felt the magnetic pull of her presence. "We cannot pretend this night is ordinary," she said, voice low but certain. "Everything between us. It demands honesty, and honesty has its own risk." He nodded slowly, his throat tight. Words felt fragile, inadequate against the weight of what they were both feeling. Yet the silence could not hold forever. Every second stretched taut, a thread about to snap, and the world around them seemed to lean closer, curious and watchful. Even the stars above, indifferent yet vast, felt like witnesses to the tension, marking time with a cold, patient gaze. Cyrus's hand itched to reach out, to close the distance, but caution anchored him, reminding him of the consequences. He thought of the elders' eyes, of the family's whispers, of the delicate balance between tradition and desire. Love, he realized, was never a private act in this world. It was observed, measured, judged, and remembered. One wrong step could shatter not only the night, but trust and reputation that had been built over lifetimes. She watched him without blinking, unwavering. There was no pleading in her gaze, only the quiet strength of someone who had lived long enough to know that true courage is revealed in moments like these. She had offered him the chance to act honestly, to reveal the truth of his heart, yet she did not demand it. She merely waited, letting the night stretch, letting the tension thicken, letting him confront the choice he had avoided for so long. Cyrus's thoughts drifted to the subplots that had quietly shaped their lives. Her brother's return, the encroachment of outsiders, the cautious watch of the elders, even the stories of past generations, all were part of the background of this moment, complicating it, raising the stakes. Every heartbeat, every glance, every unspoken word carried weight, and he felt the pressure like a storm rolling across the plains. He remembered the first winter they had spent alone in the camp, huddled together for warmth beneath thick blankets, learning that survival was as much about trust as it was about endurance. The memory made his chest ache, a reminder of what had been, of what could be, of what was still at stake. Desire alone had never been enough. Now, responsibility, history, and longing all collided in the same fragile space, demanding clarity and courage. The fire popped suddenly, sending a small spray of sparks into the night. Cyrus flinched, and she smiled faintly, a flash of amusement and reassurance that did not reduce the tension. If anything, it made it sharper, more intimate, more urgent. The moment was poised on the edge of choice, ready to tip toward revelation or retreat. He glanced toward the horizon, the vast plains stretching into darkness, the river winding faintly in the moonlight. Everything seemed alive, pressing in, watching, waiting. The coyote called again, distant but haunting, a reminder that the world continued even as hearts hesitated. Every instinct told him to act, to close the gap, to risk everything for truth. Yet caution, honed by years of survival and understanding of consequence, held him in place. Her voice cut through the silence once more. "Cyrus, the night is not endless. The fire will burn low. The wind will shift, and one day we will look back and remember this moment. You must decide what kind of memory it will be." The words hit him like a physical force, pressing against his chest, demanding acknowledgement. She was not asking for a choice made lightly. She was demanding courage, honesty, and presence. She was demanding that he step fully into the fire, fully into the night, fully into the weight of what they shared. Cyrus felt the conflict rise higher, the tension threading tighter around his heart. Every part of him knew the risk, every part of him recognized the danger, yet every part of him longed to act, to close the distance, to claim what had been building between them for years. The push and pull, the collision of desire, history, and consequence, made the night pulse with intensity, drawing them both into its gravity. She moved closer still, and the firelight licked at her features, illuminating strength, vulnerability, hope, and challenge all at once. The space between them was small now, electric and alive, and every breath they took seemed magnified, every heartbeat audible against the hush of the plains. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, watching as history and destiny converged on this singular, fragile moment. Cyrus's hand brushed against the edge of the fire, feeling its heat, its energy, and he realized that every instinct, every lesson, every fear had led him here. He wanted to speak, to act, to claim what both of them had silently hungered for, yet words would not suffice. Every word carried weight, and the wrong one could shatter everything. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and river and earth, stirring the shadows and the firelight alike. The night felt alive, a living thing aware of their choices, aware of the tension, aware of the fragile balance between courage and hesitation. Cyrus and she were not alone in this moment. The world, the land, and history itself pressed close, demanding reckoning. She stepped yet closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her, close enough that he could hear the subtle rise and fall of her breathing. "Cyrus," she whispered, soft but unwavering, "the night will not wait forever." "Neither will we," he swallowed, heart pounding, feeling the convergence of all the subplots. All the history, all the stakes pressing into a single point. The world around them seemed to vanish, leaving only firelight, breath, and the taut thread of tension stretched between them. The climax was near, poised like a drawn bow, ready to release its energy in a moment that could change everything. Cyrus took a slow breath, grounding himself in the night, the land, the fire, the pull of desire and responsibility. The conflict had reached its peak, every fear, every longing, every lesson woven tightly together, every shadow pressing close, every heartbeat loud. He could feel it, the precipice, the edge, the point at which hesitation would end and action would begin. And there they stood, the fire low and golden, the wind carrying whispers of future and past, the stars cold witnesses above, caught in a moment stretched taut with anticipation. Every choice heavy with consequence, every glance weighted with meaning. The night was alive, the tension unbearable, and the story teetered on the edge of revelation, waiting for courage to meet truth in a way that could finally change everything. Cyrus took a deep breath, the night air filling his lungs, crisp and sharp with the scent of sage and river. The tension that had weighed on him for hours seemed to settle into a quiet hum, like the echo of a drum fading across the plains. He looked at her, really looked, taking in the way the firelight caught her face, the curve of her jaw, the strength in her eyes, the unspoken history between them. For the first time that night he felt something shift, a sense of clarity piercing the fog of fear and hesitation. "I've run from this," he said quietly, voice rough but certain. "From feeling it, from saying it, from facing it. But I can't any more. Not tonight, not ever again." He stepped closer, each movement deliberate, measured, carrying the weight of all he had kept hidden. She did not flinch. She only watched, patient and steady, letting him meet her without judgment, without forcing the moment. Her eyes softened and she reached out a hand, resting it lightly on his arm. The warmth of her touch seemed to burn away the last of his doubts. "I've waited," she said, voice low, Not because I wanted to test you, but because I knew you would need to see it for yourself. We both carry history and responsibility, but we also carry this now, tonight." Cyrus nodded, feeling the weight of those words, feeling the truth in them. He realized that desire alone had never been enough. Love required courage, honesty, and commitment. He had finally understood that the choices he had feared were not punishments, they were opportunities. And tonight, in the quiet glow of the fire, he chose to step into that opportunity fully. "I'm yours tonight," he said, not as a fleeting promise, not as a whisper that could vanish in the wind, but as a declaration that carried everything he had learned, everything he had feared, everything he had longed for. Not just tonight. "Whatever comes after, whatever the land, the elders, the world asks of us, I am here." Her lips curved into a small, relieved smile, and she let out a breath she had been holding. A quiet exhale that seemed to release not only her tension, but the weight of unspoken expectations that had pressed on them both. She reached for his hand, fingers entwining with his, and Cyrus felt the grounding, the reassurance, the connection that had been building for years finally solidify. The fire popped again, sending a small shower of sparks into the air, and for a moment they both laughed softly, the sound light and free, carrying relief and joy. The wind swirled around them, playful now rather than threatening, as if the night itself approved of the choice made. Around the camp, the horses shifted in their sleep, leaves rustled gently, and even the river seemed to whisper approval. The world, alive and watching, seemed to exhale alongside them. Cyrus pulled her closer, careful but intentional, feeling the warmth of her body against his, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, the subtle weight of history and trust wrapped up in her. "We've waited long enough," he murmured, voice low, almost lost in the night. "Too long." She pressed her forehead to his, a gesture of intimacy and understanding, and for the first time that night, the fear of consequence seemed distant, almost irrelevant. They had faced hesitation, history, tradition, and fear together, and now the tension that had loomed over them was replaced by a fragile, exhilarating freedom. As they stood there, hand in hand, Cyrus thought of the subplots that had quietly shaped their journey. Her brother, once wary of Cyrus, had returned to the camp that afternoon, eyes sharp but observant. He had watched, perhaps suspicious, perhaps curious, and now he approached from the shadows, voice careful but approving. "I see the fire has spoken," he said. There was no accusation in his tone, only acknowledgement, a passing of quiet judgment. Cyrus nodded, gratitude and relief rising. The small ripple of concern that had shadowed their choices now eased, a sign that some of the world's caution could bend when honesty and courage aligned. Cyrus also thought of the elders, of the stories and lessons that had been whispered into their ears for years. The traditions and expectations had not vanished, nor would they. But tonight had shown him that tradition and desire could coexist when approached with respect and honesty. Every choice carried consequence, yes, but love, when handled with courage, could thrive even within the framework of history. She smiled up at him, and he saw in her eyes the same mix of pride, strength, and tenderness he had always admired. "We will navigate everything," she said softly. "The land, the elders, the stories we inherit, but tonight we claim this moment. We choose each other, even if the world tests us afterward." Cyrus nodded, feeling a surge of relief and joy he had not known he could carry. They had faced fear, expectation, and doubt, and emerged stronger, connected not just by desire, but by understanding and respect. The night felt alive with possibility, the tension transformed into anticipation for the life they could build together. The fire continued to flicker, casting soft light across their faces, illuminating every line of expression, every reflection of the choices they had made. Even the stars above seemed to shimmer brighter, indifferent yet celebratory, witnesses to the courage they had shown. The night, once heavy and pressing, now felt expansive, filled with hope, freedom, and the quiet promise of love honored. Cyrus and she sat together by the fire, hands intertwined, speaking softly of plans, dreams, and the stories of the land. The tension that had held them both so tightly began to dissolve into laughter and shared memory, the kind that builds foundations for trust and partnership. They spoke of the river, of the hills, of the elders' tales, and even of the outsiders encroaching on their lands. There was acknowledgement that challenges remained, but it no longer felt overwhelming. Together they could face it all. As the night deepened, the fire's glow softened, the wind stilled, and the first faint signs of dawn appeared on the horizon, painting the plains in delicate shades of pink and gold. Cyrus looked at her, warmth and certainty spreading through him. Every lesson, every hesitation, every choice had led to this clarity, that love, grounded in honesty and courage, could overcome fear, tradition, and history. She rested her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, feeling the solid weight of her trust and affection. "Whatever comes," she whispered, "we face it together. That is our strength." Cyrus kissed her forehead, a gentle, grounding gesture that carried everything words could not. "Together," he echoed, knowing that the night had tested them, history had challenged them, and yet they had chosen courage over fear. They had chosen each other. The wind carried the scent of the river, the sage, the earth, and everything they had fought to honor. Around them, the camp began to stir, animals shifting, birds calling to greet the morning, and even the elders emerging from their tents, faces soft with acknowledgement rather than reproach. The world moved forward as it always did, but now it moved around them, not against them. Cyrus and she rose from the fire, hand in hand, walking toward the river, toward the first light of day, toward the life they could now claim together. Each step felt deliberate, full of intention and joy, grounded in respect for the land and the history that had shaped them. They knew challenges remained, but they also knew they could face them, together, with honesty and courage. As they reached the river's edge, the water reflecting the early sunlight, Cyrus paused and turned to her. "This night will stay with me," he said softly. "The fear, the tension, the questions. And the answer we finally found," she smiled, eyes bright with understanding and love. "It will stay with me too. Every moment, every choice, every step that led us here, it is ours. And now we move forward, not as two waiting, but as two choosing, together." The river whispered over rocks and through reeds, a gentle sound that echoed the rhythm of their hearts. The plains stretched endlessly around them, vast and full of promise. History had shaped them, tradition had guided them, fear had tested them, and yet, standing together, they were free to write their own story. Cyrus and she embraced, the long tension of the night dissolving into warmth and certainty. The firelight, now dim, seemed almost a witness to their resolve, casting shadows that stretched behind them like reminders of what had been overcome. They had faced hesitation, fear, and expectation, and emerged stronger, united, and ready for the life ahead. As the sun rose higher, painting the plains with gold, Cyrus and she walked along the river, hands entwined, hearts aligned, carrying the lessons of the night, the wisdom of history, and the courage of love that had refused to be denied. The world was wide, the land vast, the challenges real, but for the first time, they knew they could face it all together, grounded in trust, honesty, and the enduring power of a love chosen and shared. And in that quiet, perfect moment, the plain seemed to hold its breath one last time, a gentle, approving witness to two hearts that had found each other, two souls that had chosen courage over hesitation, and a love that promised to endure, bright as the morning sun over the endless horizon.